Hello, I'm Simon Owens, and you're listening to The Business of Content, a podcast about how publishers create, distribute, and monetize their digital content. This week, I interviewed the head of social media for the Financial Times about how he uses social platforms to promote content that exists behind a hard paywall. Recently, an industry website called The Drum reported that the Financial Times, the London-based business publication, is projected to hit 1 million paying digital subscribers by next year. This is impressive, not just because only a handful of publications have hit this milestone, but also because the Financial Times has done so while maintaining a hard paywall. Unlike companies that use metered paywalls like the New York Times and Washington Post, the Financial Times hits users with a subscriber login page on the vast majority of its articles. This presents a challenge for a social media editor. How do you promote content when most of your followers won't be able to see it? To get an overview of the Financial Times social media strategy, I interviewed Jake Grovum, its head of social. He told me about how the Times has leveraged Instagram stories, what metrics his team is judged by, and why the newspaper hasn't invested resources into Snapchat. Let's jump into it. Hey, Jake, thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So you run social media for the Financial Times. How did you end up in this job, and what were you doing before it?
Yeah, so before I was actually in Washington, D.C., I spent most of my career during and after finishing college as a political reporter, mainly doing state politics reporting and that kind of thing. So I was in DC working at the Pew Trusts on a project called State Line, basically covering state politics and policy around the country. And it was a pretty small staff. And so I got involved with social media there. And that's kind of how I started kind of bridging the gap between being a more traditional reporter and working in social. Ended up moving to New York and had to find a different position because Pew isn't in New York, and found the position here at the FT and applied and started working here about 3 years ago now. So,
it's interesting. I was an editor at U.S. News and World Report, and back then, the role of social media manager was kind of like a glorified RSS feed. It was just about posting links to stories. You were in a traditional reporting role. Do you think that the social media, like the social media editor role at publications, now that like platforms are getting more robust in terms of hosting native content and different stuff like that, like their social media team is playing more of a journalistic role these days?
yeah, I mean, that's definitely why I moved into social myself. And that's kind of the direction we've been trying to go here, is that, we're trying to, as opposed to just having links to stories and kind of like teasing stories and getting people to click through, we're really trying to tell stories on platforms and like give people experiences that are native, that they can consume and share and click through if they want to on the networks that they're using. And that's just kind of, as you mentioned, all these platforms are just kind of increasingly making new ways to do that, whether it's Instagram stories, threads, Twitter moments, whatever. There's just consistently new tools and different ways to do that. So it's just been exciting. And yeah, that's what we've been trying to do. So.
Yeah, I want to talk a little bit more in a second about your use of Instagram and Instagram stories. But under the purview of your current role, what are kind of all the platforms you oversee at the Financial Times?
Yeah, our main ones, like most places, are Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and LinkedIn. We have kind of a smaller, more experimental and newer project around WhatsApp. But definitely, I mean, the main ones for us are kind of the big two, Facebook and Twitter, and then Instagram is kind of catching up as a third from there. And it kind of depends how you measure it, whether you're talking about engagement or audience or traffic, that kind of thing. So.
Mm-hmm. And the Financial Times is somewhat unique than a lot of other mainstream publications in that it's one of the it hasn't a subscription business model, but it wasn't like a recent kind of outgrowth. You guys have had a paywall of sorts for almost from the beginning since the website launch, unlike the New York Times and the Washington Post, who have more recently launched paywall strategies. And you guys have had traditionally more of a hard paywall, not like a metered paywall like you'll find at the New York Times or the Washington Post. And I saw a recent article saying that you guys are projected to hit 1 million paying subscribers soon. And so I guess I'd love to hear about like the role of the paywall for a social media strategist? Like, how does that make your strategy any different? Do you approach things in a different way because you know that a large percentage of the potential users who might see a social media post would end up hitting and bouncing off of that paywall?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if it's necessarily we approach it differently, but it does dovetail nicely with an approach to kind of trying to tell stories natively on platforms, right? I mean, so like, we give people there's an advantage, and you get something out of following us on social, even if you don't click through as often as we might like you to, or you don't subscribe or anything. You're getting something out of that experience of following us and interacting with us on these platforms. But also there is the additional potential that, someone clicks through, and there are kind of limited ways that people can click through here and there to read. And then, we do generate some new subscriptions from social. So that's part of it as well. So.
Yeah. And I mean, there's all kinds of studies that show even for free publications, majority of people who retweet or share articles, a lot of times they don't even actually click through themselves to read them. And sometimes the headline is a pretty good delivery of the information that at least the main information that's going to be gleaned from the article. So maybe that's a testament to you don't actually need to read the articles always to glean value from a publication's social media account.
Yeah, I mean, we would love to think that everyone, who follows us and sees our stuff on social is reading every word of every article that we're linking to. But, I think we're obviously well aware that that's not the case. But yeah, I mean, it's all, putting this stuff on social in a compelling way, in a shareable way, a way that people like and want to engage with is, good practice for us as an organization. It gets our journalism out in front of more people than it would otherwise. And also, helps us reach audiences we wouldn't otherwise. So, for instance, we have a much more heavily kind of U.S. American-based following on social than we do if you just looked at kind of our core website audience, and certainly like a paper audience. So that's part of it too. It's, we reach different people, new people, whether those are subscribers, potential subscribers, or just people who like what we do on social. All of those things kind of come together. That's all good for the organization in one way or another.
And like a lot of other financial publications who deal with a lot of numbers and data, I'm sure there's lots of opportunities to repurpose charts and graphs and stuff like that. Is that mainly stuff that's already being created for the articles and you're just repurposing it for it? Do you have access to designers who can, take information in an article and put together a quick chart for you? How do you kind of repurpose and use images from the actual articles and also come up with images on your own?
Yeah. So, it's a combination of all those things. About a year and a half or so maybe ago, we developed kind of what we call a social chart kind of template or strategy. If you've seen them, they're the black background as opposed to the pink background that most things on the website have. So that was developed just for social, and we asked the data graphics team to come up to make us versions of charts they're working on. Sometimes we have tools that we make our own that are kind of original and apart from anything that you would see on the website that only live on social. And sometimes it's just kind of adapting what goes on site to maybe a simpler version that fits a mobile screen, whereas the full desktop version might be some kind of long graphic you have to scroll through to experience the whole thing that doesn't quite fit on Twitter or Facebook or whatever.
And I remember circa 2011, 2012, when I was working in magazine journalism, there was this we subscribed to all these services like Getty Images or these political cartoon services and stuff like this. And we wanted to start cross-posting that content to Facebook because at the time Facebook was putting a lot of emphasis in its algorithm on native images, and there was this pushback from our lawyers and legal department. We didn't know whether these contracts were written so that we were allowed to post there. Is that something when you got I've seen some good photography on your Instagram page? What's the kind of rules that you're the parameters that you're working with there? Or has the landscape changed where that's automatically figured into when you're negotiating these image rights stuff?
Yeah, we have kind of set rights agreements for the images we use on social. So for instance, there are some images that will appear on site or even in the paper that we can't use on social. So there are certain ones that we have agreements for to use on social, whether it's Instagram. Obviously, we credit all of those. So we do make use of those, and those are really important for us, especially stories that we don't necessarily have a photographer there to do original photos for us. And then you mentioned cartoons and political cartoons, that kind of thing. We have a couple in-house cartoonists as well who are great that we make a lot of use of their work as well, and that works really well for us too.
How closely are the people at like the analytics staff? How often or how much are they monitoring like which social media platforms lead to the most paying subscriptions? Like, are they actually able to trace back those metrics?
We are able to. So for the social team, and we sit within the broader audience engagement team within the newsroom. So it's a totally editorial team. Generating subscriptions or conversions, however you want to talk about it, isn't something that kind of like we look at as a metric of success for us one way or another, but it's something that, in other parts of the business people are aware of and we can measure and keep an eye on as well. So like we're aware of it, but it's not kind of the goal of the social team or even AE team to generate new subscriptions or trialists or anything like that.
And are you guys required to put on like URL tags or anything like that? So when someone clicks on a link from Twitter, like it's easier for the analytics team to track like the journey of that user or anything like that?
We have some tagging and different ways of going about that. To be honest, I've sat with some of our analytics people. There's a couple of them who sit within the AE team full time as well. And so I confess I don't know the entire ins and outs of how we track all those users, but yeah, we are able to tell kind of, when people are coming and when they're returning. We talk about quality visits, which is when someone kind of comes back within a certain time frame. So all those things are kind of how we measure what we're getting out of what we're doing on social beyond just kind of a visit here and there, a visit, to this story or that story. We're trying to kind of put together a narrative of some kind or something that we can kind of have a better measurement of what we're actually getting out of what we're doing long term.
Have any of those analytics people shared with you which of the platforms has the highest conversion rate for you guys in terms of subscribers?
Off the top of my head, I don't recall. I mean, I know I've seen it. I don't remember which one exactly. I mean, I think if you looked at it just from a volume standpoint, my guess is that, you would see it would correlate pretty closely with the networks where we get more traffic from. So it's just, so like on a given month, if Facebook is the biggest driver of traffic, chances are you would see more conversions just based on percentage wise from Facebook or, that kind of thing.
Well, speaking of Facebook, it's become kind of accepted wisdom that people don't go on Facebook to read industry and work-related news. And obviously, you guys are a very financial-oriented and work and industry-oriented publication. So, I mean, do you think that that's the case? That like that is Facebook probably less important to you guys than it might be for something that was less like industry and financial-oriented? Do you think?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny. The broader question of how important Facebook is for us is probably different given, what you mentioned, our subscription model. So like we're a sound business without Facebook. So it's kind of an added bonus that what we get from it. But, I do think even with Facebook, like there's 2 billion people who use Facebook. So there's to kind of paint a broad brush of how everyone uses it to get this kind of news or that kind of news, I think is kind of oversimplifying it. Everyone, you can find your audience or people who want to interact with you wherever they may be. So for us, just as an example, we write a lot about like professional services, the big 4 auditing firms, that kind of thing. And that is consistently one of the most engaging topics for us on Facebook. Anything, KPMG, McKinsey, all those firms, when we post stories about that, it gets a ton of engagement, and it's some of the, most successful posts that we've had even since I've been here have been around the big 4 and kind of some of their troubles in Europe or whatever. Even how AI is changing consulting. All those things are things that we see a ton of engagement on Facebook specifically, even more so than we would see on LinkedIn or Twitter. So, Yeah, I mean, Facebook is changing, and it may not be kind of the news hub that some of us thought it was going to be even a couple of years ago. But I think there are ways, there are still people there, and if you can find ways to reach them, to engage with them, you can still get what you want out of it. But I think it's important to kind of keep in mind that what you want to get out of Facebook, as opposed to just trying to just see what they want to give you, if that makes sense.
Talk to me about Instagram. Like, I read about how your team has been using Instagram stories to kind of craft visual narratives out of Financial Times articles.
Yeah. So Instagram's been a huge growth platform for us. A few years ago when I started, we had around, I think, 40,000 followers. It was kind of something that we didn't use that often. And I kind of came in just with an interest in it and kind of growing the platform and seeing what we could experiment with there. So we just crossed 900,000 followers this week. So we've seen kind of just incredible growth in followers, and the stories have been a big part of that. So it's kind of the same general approach to everything else, is that we kind of have self-contained stories where you can, whether it's an explainer or an event or, whatever, we tell kind of the entire story that you want to consume or interact with, if we have a poll or anything like that, within the story, and kind of give people what they need to know about whatever it is that we're covering. And then, let them swipe up to read more if they kind of want to go more in depth. So, it depends on the story, how much time or effort goes into producing them. Some of them are more complicated than others, but, really, yeah, it's just been a really experimental platform. For a while, they disappeared after 24 hours. So it was really easy to try new things because, after a day, it was gone forever. So we just have been able to do a lot of, experimental things, and it's worked out really well for us, I think, contributing to the growth. And, we get some decent traffic from those as well. And not just from topics that, you might think is traditionally Instagram friendly. I mean, some of our most successful stories have been, around like the future of cash in economies, and, kind of business school rankings and political stories. The Apple iPhone launch. Well, I guess that's maybe something you'd expect to be more successful, but, kind of like more core FT topics do quite well for us. So I think it's, we've been kind of proud and it's been nice to see that we can find a way to make the stories that we want to tell, that are important to us editorially, be successful on a platform like Instagram consistently.
And so what about for the main Instagram feed? Like, Instagram is famous for it not allowing URLs. So you see all these publications say, for the story, go click on the link in our profile. And it always seemed like a really inefficient way to go about it. But and especially there was this question of what's going to happen once LinkedIn or Instagram becomes more algorithmic, because you could say click on the link in our bio, but that post could be 2 days old because it's coming out of chronological order. But I found myself recently actually clicking through when it's enticing enough and actually clicking on those links. And it looks like a lot of publications now actually have like a landing page for their Instagram links, so that kind of takes care of the chronological problem. Do you find that users are actually doing that? They're actually going back to the profile and clicking on that link and then clicking through to the story?
Well, yeah, so we can see in the analytics, how many people click through based on a certain post that they're seeing. And, it depends on the post. Some of them, I mean, it's never a huge number, but, so we can see that some people do. And, for us, we just have a link to the homepage in our bio for the time being. So like driving clicks through the bio link has never been something that we've even kind of tried very much at. The posts have always kind of just been, they are what they are. They're extending the brand. They're growing our following. It's kind of just been just trying to grow for a while and just kind of let it be. We are looking at developing one of those landing page type strategies now that we've kind of, before we kind of even realized that, we have 900,000 followers now, a pretty big audience. We're getting people that are, just kind of like super engaged on the platform. So we are trying to think now if, there's maybe more we can do with the feed posts we post a lot of charts there that we can see on the back end. People will save them almost as much as they're liking them, which is interesting. So that shows that people, are going out of their way to be able to refer back to them. And so that tells us that, we're giving something that people find like useful and really informative, and that, chances are that they will want to then, click through and read more if they're willing to save it or refer back to it later.
What about LinkedIn? Like they've been doubling down on editorial. They've hired away, all these financial journalists to serve as editors there. We're told that more and more people aren't just using it as a site to host their resumes, but they're actually, using it as an actual social network, returning to it on a daily basis. Seems like the Financial Times, again, reporting on industry and career type things would be the perfect for that platform. What are you guys noticing as LinkedIn kind of doubles down on financial news?
Yeah, so we've gone through a couple iterations of LinkedIn strategy. I mean, so we have a whole work and career section that is exactly what it sounds like. And so, that type of content, we find does do, quite well. For us, LinkedIn can sometimes be kind of random in terms of what does well. So we have a regular feature called Life of a Song. And last year, one of our best performing LinkedIn posts was a Life of a Song story that went out on an auto feed to LinkedIn that was about the TLC song No Scrubs. Which was so if you can explain to me why that caught on with our LinkedIn audience, I'm not really sure. But so we've kind of, it performs well for us, and some things that you might expect do quite well. What we have seen recently, and I'm sure you're aware, is LinkedIn is doing more kind of like editorial curation on their kind of like trending stories lists, and kind of pushing content themselves to their users. And we do see quite a bit of engagement and traction on the stories that get picked up by those curators. And even that can be, on any given day, maybe just a big business story. It could be a column from our management columnist, anything. But that's done quite well for us too.
I heard they have like a Slack channel or something where you can like pitch that gives them a direct line to the editors at a lot of the big publications, where they can pitch stories to them or something like that.
Yes, that's true.
And I've seen like some of your competitors like Cheddar and Business Insider, they do native video on LinkedIn. It seems to be doing well right now, where they'll do like one of those kind of silent or a video with like kind of music in the background, and it's like some kind of cool job or invention or something like that. Have you guys done any experimentation on that?
Yeah, so we were part of the pilot program for native video on LinkedIn, and we posted basically video that we had for Facebook we would use on LinkedIn as well. We moved a bit away from that just because we kind of thought, on Facebook with video, you kind of sometimes see like a kind of a gain in reach or a gain in engagement around like high performing videos, or you might see more click throughs associated with the video that you post. We weren't kind of like seeing as much of the returns from video, and we weren't frankly getting as much of the kind of like in-depth data and kind of engagement numbers that we wanted to see. So we just kind of moved away from it. We still post some video from there. We had an interview with Bill Gates around some of the Gates Foundation work that they've been doing around Africa and global poverty and that kind of thing this week. And we put that on LinkedIn because that seemed like a good subject, a good person for that audience. So we do kind of more strategic and selective video posts to LinkedIn, but nowhere near the kind of volume that we were during the pilot program or that we would do on Facebook.
So how do you collaborate with the news team? Like, how reactive are you? Or I mean, are they bringing you in as they're developing stories, or is it you waiting kind of for articles or whatever to come out and then thinking, how do we craft additional content around it?
Yeah, I mean, so I sit in New York. I sit in the middle of the news desk, right next to the executive editor and across from the news editor. So I'm kind of like right in the middle of the commissioning and editing process. In London, we have a seat on the main news desk, so we're kind of as involved as we can be in that process as things are coming together or being either commissioned or edited or published, anything like that. On bigger projects, it kind of just depends. Often we get asked kind of like, how early do you want to be involved? Because sometimes, there's only so much you can do about something kind of coming together. But trying to figure out how to work together and kind of manage those projects is something that I'm guessing that a lot of social teams kind of have to tackle, and it depends on the story or how quickly the news is coming together or whatever. But as far as like stories go and the news, we try to stay as closely plugged in with the team, the news teams, as we can be. And we attend, the editorial conference in London every morning, and just like everyone else does in the newsroom. So,
do you have any formal collaborations with the platforms? Like, I know some of your stuff is repurposed for Medium. Like, are you guys? There's all these like news headlines every day about Twitter forming some kind of video deal with BuzzFeed or Bloomberg or Facebook Watch, or are you guys developing any exclusive content for anyone else, or like, does that not really fit into your subscription-based business model?
Not at the moment. We produce exclusive content for platforms, like for our own accounts. So like our stories and whatever. That only exists on the platforms, but those are things that kind of our own initiative. So we don't have any of those kind of agreements at the moment. No.
Mm-hmm. And are you like, is this kind of like a purposeful thing, or it just like so far it just hasn't organically happened?
I think, you mentioned we kind of have our core audience that exists, on our own platforms, and that's always kind of, the main priority. And so, when you start talking about putting effort or resources or, whatever into something for a different platform, it's always kind of a push and pull in terms of, how to balance that with everything else that we're trying to do. So like even with video, it's a matter of, if we're producing video to meet some kind of Facebook agreement, what else are we not doing that might serve our on-site audience or anything else. So I don't know if it's kind of, purposeful or whatever, but it is kind of, I think, just trying to always kind of keep in mind our broader engagement and business objectives around, who we're trying to serve, what we are getting. We talk about reach and return in terms of engagement. So like what we get out of the kind of, reach and off-platform engagement that we're doing on all these different platforms.
And is Snapchat just not worth dealing with if you're not like a super, entertainment oriented? Especially now that like Instagram is basically bigger and basically has all the same features and seems to be like cannibalizing or completely cutting Snapchat's legs off from under it. Like, do you guys even bother with Snapchat?
Well, so we've never actually done anything on Snapchat. So, but that's almost been that's two things, I think, just kind of a resource, kind of like not sure how much time to dedicate to it, and also not being quite sure where we fit or like what approach. We didn't just want to just jump in and start doing whatever. So there's that. And then I think, early on, it was a hard platform to kind of produce off platform for. It wasn't like stories early on on Instagram where you could upload something easily. So everything had to be done live or natively. And for us, frankly, a lot of the stories we publish aren't a case where you're out in the field, something that you can kind of do live as you're like on a red carpet or covering a protest or something. That's not quite as easy to do when you're covering, a big merger or a deal or, whatever, something in the market, whatever it may be. So there was that. And then I think, once they developed Discover, and clearly a number of organizations jumped into that, to me at least, it became clear that like that was the place for publishers, and that those were places that had teams of, half a dozen to 12, 15 people producing something every day. And that just wasn't something that, I think we were ever quite interested in doing. So it was kind of like, it didn't really see much of a fit for us, and it was never really clear what we would get out of that either. So
yeah, like it strikes me as one of those networks that doesn't have a lot of promise at this moment. So unless you have like tons of extra resources where you can just throw a team at them, it seems like not even worth it.
Yeah, I mean, I always thought it would kind of just it'd be fun to come up with something. I mean, it was always in the back of my mind that it would be just kind of fun to experiment with, but it was never quite the right time or the right thing. So, yeah.
Okay, well, Jake, those were all the questions I had. Where can people find you?
I'm on Twitter at jgrovum and behind the Financial Times, wherever on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. So
awesome. Well, this was a lot of fun. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Okay, that's all we have for you today. Be sure to subscribe to the Business of Content on iTunes or wherever you get your podcast. See you next week.